Hey, hey, teach me how to DBQ. Hey, hey, teach me how to DBQ.
Welcome back to the second video on the DBQ. In the first video, we discussed how to read and analyze the prompt, and then how to also read and annotate the various documents. In this video, we'll be describing how to group those documents together and then to form claims. So as you're reading the documents and annotating the documents, in the back of your mind, you should be thinking about, all right, which one of these documents strike me as similar? Because ultimately, what you need to do is build claims responsive to the prompt, which is going to form the basis for your thesis. So try to create at least 3 groups, 2 if you have to, but our goal is to identify at least 3 kind of sub-claims that we want to be making when it comes to writing our thesis. So I like to do this by breaking it down on my piece of paper and just drawing 3 little boxes where I've identified the various documents that I believe share kind of common characteristics that will allow me to form a claim. So you want to place all the documents into groups. Now, I say all. Now, you don't have to use all of the documents. If there's one that you're really struggling with, you can kind of take that document out. However, you're running the risk of, by only choosing to do 6 documents, you have to nail all 6, because if you misread or misinterpret one of the 6 documents and you only correctly use 5 of them in your essay, then you only get 1 point. Whereas if you correctly use and identify 6 documents, you get 2 points. So I'm going to encourage you at least to take a shot at placing all of the documents into the various groups. So let's just, for purposes of illustration, just randomly assign some documents to each of these 3 groups. Now, the critical thing then to do is to identify the kind of common characteristic or the claim that you will be building for each of these 3 groups. So what are the characteristics of those documents that, responsive to the prompt, ultimately are similar about each of those documents? So once you've done this step, the next step is to write your thesis. So again, if we think about our metaphor here, the thesis is kind of like our piece of bread that's going to hold the sandwich together. But another way to think of the thesis sometimes is, if you're going to have multiple claims, is we can break that piece of bread apart into our various subgroups and subclaims. So the thesis statement ultimately is what connects those groups and those claims together. So the thesis must consist of 1 or more sentences located in the introduction or conclusion. In order to get the point, the thesis point, you have to have your thesis statement in your introduction in the first paragraph or in a specified conclusion. Now, what kind of words are good to use when writing a thesis? The word because is a great word because it shows a level of analysis and a level of higher order critical thinking. Other important words that ultimately allow you to tie these claims together are transition and connection words like while, however, although, both, or by contrast. So those are going to be those connection or transition words that we are going to use in our thesis. So let's look back at our prompt. Evaluate the extent to which the spread of Buddhism transformed Chinese beliefs between 350 CE and 900 CE. Well, here's what the rubric says specifically about the thesis point. So to get the thesis point, you have to respond to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis or claim that establishes a line of reasoning. So let's take a look at an example thesis and decide whether we think it meets this threshold. So example 1, the spread of Buddhism transformed Chinese beliefs significantly. Do we think that satisfies this requirement? Is this a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning? Hopefully you said no. This is insufficient. All this did was rework and restate the prompt, but it doesn't actually add any value. It doesn't show the ways in which Buddhism was transformed, or maybe the ways in which it ultimately wasn't transformed. So that one would not get the point. Here's a second example. The spread of Buddhism transformed Chinese beliefs because some people liked it and some people didn't. Hopefully with this one as well, I think that this also would not meet the threshold, because there really is no historically defensible claim here. I mean, whenever you are dealing with anything, obviously some people are probably going to like it, some people are not going to like it. So there's not really sufficient specificity and clarity in your claim. All right, so let's look at a third example. So this one is more of a template kind of an example. So it says the spread of Buddhism transformed Chinese beliefs because it. And then in this case, maybe you're going to add in, all right, what are the documents that support the argument that Buddhism ultimately transformed Chinese beliefs? In what ways did it transform Chinese beliefs? And that might be your claim A group. However, some Chinese oppose Buddhism because, and maybe that might be your claim B group. Some documents that might suggest, wait a second, not everyone was on board with this transformation to Buddhism. While others, maybe there might be a claim C group. Maybe there's some middle ground there, or some other way about thinking about these documents that ultimately allows you to form a third group. Now, do you think this would get the point? It all depends again on what you put in those blanks for what your claim A, your claim B, your claim C is. But I think if you can make specific historical, defensible claims and establish a clear line of reasoning, I think not only would you get the thesis point, there's a possibility that you might be on your way to also earning the complex understanding point. And the reason for that is, well, here's the language of the complex understanding point. Demonstrates a complex understanding of the historical developments that is the focus of the prompt, using evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument that addresses the question. Here, because we have this word however, and because we are recognizing not only the changes to Chinese beliefs, but also some qualifications to those by laying out the people who were opposed to it, and then also suggesting even some modification, or again, an even further level of qualification by developing a third group here. So again, this all depends on how well you lay out this argument in the course of your whole essay, whether or not you might get the second complex understanding point. But I think certainly this type of structure for a thesis would hopefully get you well on your way to earning that second point. So the thesis is not the first thing that goes in your essay. The first thing that's supposed to go in your essay is contextualization. So you need to start your first paragraph, your introductory paragraph, with contextualization, and that's worth 1 point. For me, one way that I can maybe get around this problem is I'm reading the documents as I'm generating the thesis. I want to write my thesis first. So a strategy for that might be for you to start your thesis halfway or even 3/4 of the way down the page. So start your thesis here, and then you can write your thesis first. Then you can go back after you've written your thesis, and notice I didn't indent when I started my thesis. You can go back and you can indent at the very top, and then you can write your contextualization here. And so here I add all of the rest of my contextualization. Now notice I have this space between my thesis and my contextualization. Might that space present a problem? The answer is yes. Why? Your thesis has to be in the introductory or first paragraph. And so in order to make it clear that your thesis is in your introductory or first paragraph, I recommend that you draw arrows clearly showing that your thesis is supposed to be part of this first paragraph. Then what I would do is I would start my first body paragraph by skipping a line or two and then indenting that paragraph as well. So what is contextualization? Let's look at an example. So here is a bottle of organic tomato mushroom sauce that was produced by Middle Earth Organics Company. And they had a line of sauces, and they chose these various Renaissance paintings to advertise their sauce. And when you look at this particular image, and you look at her face, I'm just curious kind of what strikes you, or what do you think this person is thinking about or wondering about? I mean, she seems to be kind of deep in thought. So if we understand the broader context of this image, this is actually the painting from which this particular woman was taken. And we can see the woman here cutting the head off. And now, as a result of looking at it in terms of the broader context, ultimately that might change the way in which you view her emotional state, what she's thinking about at the time. So context matters. Contextualization ultimately situates the argument within the broader historical events, developments, or the processes of the time period. It ultimately zooms out from the specific argument that you are about to focus on, and instead gets the reader up to speed. It sets the stage for the argument that you're trying to make. One way to think about this is it's kind of like the crawl at the beginning of the Star Wars movie, right? If you've never seen any of the Star Wars movie, you can still kind of enjoy the individual movies by just getting up to speed by reading that Star Wars crawl at the beginning of the movie. So contextualization should be at least 3 quality sentences. 3 quality sentences at a minimum. It can't just be like a mere reference. It has to be of sufficient length and sufficient quality. And so for me, I think the rule of thumb should be at least 3 quality sentences that sets the stage for what your argument is going to be. And ultimately, hopefully, you're developing some kind of a transition in that last sentence between your contextualization and your thesis. So let's think about what might count as proper contextualization. So here we have our prompt. Evaluate, again, the extent to which the spread of Buddhism transformed Chinese beliefs between 350 CE and 900 CE. So again, the critical thing here is to provide some context for the spread of Buddhism and or also Chinese beliefs. And what we need to do is focus again on this first date, because we need to set the stage and explain, all right, if we sort of zoom out and assume, all right, now that Buddhism has spread to China, there's a number of questions that we need to be able to ask. First of all, who is responsible for the spread of Buddhism? Or, what were the existing Chinese beliefs? When did Buddhism spread to China? Where did it come from? Where was it spreading? How did it spread? Why ultimately does it spread? What's the reason why the Chinese may have been so willing to adopt this new religion? And so all of these are the critical questions that hopefully you can answer. And in doing so, we'll be providing some context for actually getting into your essay when you're discussing instead and focusing on the transformation of Chinese beliefs as a result of the spread of Buddhism. All right, so that's how you write the introductory paragraph with both the contextualization and the thesis. In the next video, we will pick up on how to write the body paragraphs. Thanks for watching.